All right, guys, we are now joined by a very special guest, the 2009 Indy Lights champion and very widely known to IndyCar name. I know you've been on TV over the years a few times, but you guys should know it by now. But it's JR Hildebrand joining us today. Thanks for taking the time, man. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Glad to be on with you guys.
So I guess the first question I wanted to ask you, when I was growing up watching IndyCar and getting into it, the only reason that it ever got to me was that my grandpa brought home like Sports Illustrateds for me to read. And Dan Weldon was on one of the ads. So he was the big target name at the time, along with Scott. And there's a super target being built by our house. And there was like a year and a half of my life where it was Dan Weldon, and then later it was Dario Franchitti, and it was just this like 20, 30 foot tall picture of them just standing there. And it was like, this is Target now. So I cheered for Dan when he went to the Panther racing car, and then you took over the car, and Dan was without a full time ride. So the only option I had was I'm a JR Hildebrand guy now. And I got lucky because I was a NASCAR guy and you were great at ovals. That's what I wanted to ask you about is how were you so good at ovals growing up in the sport through the IndyCar ladder system, which kind of generally goes away from ovals.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think even now compared to, I had Kyle Kirkwood as my teammate last year at Indy, who was the reigning Indy Lights champ, and he and I were kind of comparing notes. I mean, at least when I did Indy Lights, we did a lot of oval racing, so
Right.
whereas the guys now they don't hardly do any. They race at Gateway and another track or two maybe on the schedule.
Yeah,
So it's
I think it's just Gateway, and I could be wrong. And then the USF Pro 2000, regular 2000, they only race at IRP, and that
IRP,
product
yeah.
looked sick under the lights. I know it's on Flow, and not many people have it, and that track isn't like great with the broadcast, but like the product of open wheel cars on a short track at night beats everything else.
Yeah, I'm totally with you there. So I guess I would put it this way. I think it came down to a couple of things, at least right away in IndyCar, which were, I had done 2 seasons of Indy Lights in part because, that was during the time period basically when Champ Car was, it kind of merged into the IndyCar series. And so a lot of us had started out, a lot of us that were coming up through the ladder, James Hinchcliffe, Graham Rahal. I mean, there was a number of guys that were kind of within a year or two, basically, of where I was at on one side or the other of that we were all having to annually kind of make a choice, like, are we sticking under the, for a long period of time, the F2000 Star Mazda or Pro Mazda at the time, which was kind of the next step up, then to Atlantics. That was really, those were where that was, I guess I would put it this way, that was where the most competition was in the ladder system. And so when you're coming up, you're almost not, you're not thinking too hard about exactly where it's all going to go. Now it's much more straightforward. Everything is kind of this more simple ladder under IndyCar, but at the time you were just chasing, where are the other guys that I'm going to kind of need to beat, basically, to be able to showcase my skill and talent to be able to move up to the next level. Where are those guys all at? And so, that basically went from all of those drivers being in Atlantics in 2006 and 2007 to this 1 year in 2008 where it was kind of split up between the two. I made the switch to Indy Lights that year. And then, in 2009 in Indy Lights, basically everybody had migrated to Indy Lights by then. And so,
Mhm.
I guess I say all of that just to say, having spent a couple years in Indy Lights, because of the way that all transpired at the time, we raced. I think my championship season at Andretti, we raced, Kansas, Kentucky, Homestead, Chicago. We raced the Freedom 100, Milwaukee, Iowa. Like, we did a lot of oval racing, I guess, during the year, and that at that time those cars, although they were, they were different than an Indy car, certainly a lot like the Indy car, at least of that era, which was the previous generation to what we kind of are still working with now. They were designed and built at a very similar time. They both ran on Firestone tires. I mean, I remember every time I tested an IndyCar in my, while I was racing Indy Lights with Andretti, and then a couple of tests in the following season, I kind of had a season of, call it free agency or unemployment, depending on how you
Mhm.
want to look at it. But, I won the Indy Lights Championship in 2009, wasn't full time with Panther until 2011, but was testing for teams kind of in that interim period. It just never felt that different to me, road course or oval. I got out of the Indy Lights car, got in the Indy car. It was a little faster, did everything a little better. So I think building up that experience in an Indy Lights car that was very similar to the Indy car at the time, doing a lot of oval racing in that car over the course of 2 years in good cars. I mean, I was racing for teams that we were always a threat in Indy Lights on any of those oval races. Getting a couple of IndyCar tests. I tested at Kansas for Andretti. Um, all of that made me, I guess, at least coming into the IndyCar series, I would say even compared to guys now, much more prepared for oval racing. And like even the Freedom 100 at that time, the in 2009, sort of the last time I did the Freedom 100, it was super hot. I mean, you were not too wide through the corner. You were not the cars, even just the racing dynamic was not that different. It was just at slower speed, basically, compared to the IndyCar. So I definitely remember, and I guess all of that. Then looking at Panther was good on ovals, and so
Yeah, that makes sense thinking back to it because Dan
yeah,
always
like
was a threat in that Texas race. And for some reason, when I think back to like the stuff in my head that I can remember of him on the track, it always goes back to one of those Saturday night 550 lap Texas races.
yeah, they were just were we perfect? Would it have been nice to have teammates? You're racing against Scott Dixon and Dario Franchitti at Ganassi, right? So
Mhm.
you still have you still got really tier one guys that you've got to go beat, but at least just from a general confidence and kind of comfort for me, I knew I was, even just from my mentality, and kind of that side of it, I knew I was stepping into cars at those tracks that had a track record of being competitive. Um, and and so it just, fortunately for me, and not all rookies do, not all rookies get into a car right away. I mean,
Right.
I feel for the guys now that come into this with a tenth of the oval racing experience that I had, just because the way the Indy Lights is now, and then are not always getting in a great car. If you're not stepping into an Andretti or a Penske or a Ganassi seat, which a lot of these guys aren't, you're just having to figure it out on the fly. So I say all that, I guess, just to say that my scenario helped, I guess, getting into that situation. And then that year at Panther, they brought on Buddy Rice. So we ran two cars at the Speedway. We ran two cars at Kentucky and Las Vegas at the end of the year. So that really bolstered kind of what we were bringing to the table, because it wasn't all on me to figure out where everything was going. So I think all of that. I also think, in a general sense, like, oval racing did just suit my style. Like, I was
Mhm.
attracted to IndyCar and open wheel racing from when I was a little kid, just because it was like the fastest cars that were out there, period, kind of. So that aspect of it just always appealed to me. And I think when that happens as a race car driver, when you really want to go do something just to go do it, just to drive it, and it's not strictly about showing up and having to be competitive, that does kind of, it helps like manifest kind of being good at it in a way. Like there's something in there that definitely plays a role.
Yeah, and like,
So,
oh, go ahead, Damon.
I was just curious because for me, as in I wasn't necessarily an avid IndyCar fan growing up, right? You watch the Indy 500, you watch some of the bigger races that are close to you. You kind of watch in and out a little bit. That's how I grew up watching it. So for me, watching you come into the series, JR, was a little different because it was like all of a sudden you're there, like you're one of the guys all of a sudden right there, and didn't really have like that you know here's this slow upbringing, or here's this. So where does the JR Hildebrand story really kind of start, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you saying that. I guess I think that, there was an element, there's for me, throughout my career, I've kind of had to be, had to be able to perform and execute to be able to get those rides in the first place. Like I don't have millions of dollars of family money or
Hmm.
sponsorship business deals or sponsorship or whatever that, and I come from, my dad was a CPA in San Francisco. Like it wasn't like, we I grew up in an affluent area and all that kind of stuff, but to go racing, it's like way out of that league of expense,
Right.
so even for the average, I mean, my dad always says, like, the amount of money that it possibly could have cost for you to become a baseball player compared to a race car driver is like, you could have had a current Major League Baseball player as a hitting coach probably for less than it costs to like get through a couple of years worth of the lower levels of going racing. But that, I guess I say that just to say it was sort of built into my mindset from a fairly early point that, like, you have to show up and kick ass and be prepared to put everything you've got on the table right away.
Hmm.
And so that served me well through my career, right? Like there was a lot of, even the Panther Racing deal. I think I was kind of the obvious candidate for that job going from 2010 to 2011, given that
Hmm.
Dan wasn't going to return. Um, However, I still, we did a 2-day test at the old Phoenix before they resurfaced it and did it. We were probably the last open wheel car to run there. Um, and basically just because they knew that it was a super hard track. And that was like my job audition, basically. Like, I don't know what the, I don't know how well it had to go for me to get the job. I don't know how badly it would have had to have gone for me to have not gotten it. But I guess just in a general sense, every time, the first time I got in somebody's car, whether that was, test day at Sebring with Andretti, or it was, testing even with the Indy Lights team at Putnam Park, that test at PIR with Panther, that my mindset was always, all right, I gotta go show these guys. I gotta go show these guys that I deserve this on like lap one,
Hmm.
And so I think that, that's a mentality that I appreciated about watching drivers that were ahead of me on the ladder. It was something that I definitely just, it resonated with me. I grew up like a huge Dale Senior fan, actually, and
Oh, hell yeah.
that was always something to me that he was just like, yeah, I see it in the
Yeah.
background. He just, there was no nonsense kind of,
Hmm.
and so I think adopting that approach, having that mindset about it, um, and then being kind of thrust into this deal at Panther Racing, the environment dictated that a little bit too. That it was just kind of like, I was on a 1-year contract to start with. This was obviously, these were huge shoes to be filling, not just of Dan's, but one of the biggest sponsors in the series. There's a lot going on here. I didn't really have time to just like get acclimated for a year. I might have been out of a ride if I had taken my time from that point of view. So that can come back to hurt a little bit. Like it's not always the right attitude to have, but um, I think at least in terms of getting into the series and at least executing at a high level at the places where we as a group were good, and be able to take advantage of the car being good, and that was, to your earlier point, Connor, like a lot of times that was on the oval tracks.
Hmm.
um I think I at least showed what we were capable of doing at those places kind of right away, and that's something that I definitely take a little bit of pride in, just wherever. I mean, we this past month, obviously it was an enormous bummer not to be in the car at Indy, but but to be the guy that was constantly getting a phone call from big teams thinking, all right, we would trust this guy to just get in after not being in the car in a year and be ready to rock and roll on like lap one. To have at least established that about my ability, is something I'm proud of for sure.
Did you get called after Steph's injury?
Yeah, we were talking about it there. Obviously I've raced for Dryer in the past. I think maybe people on the outside of this of like the immediate industry maybe put a little bit more into the manufacturer situation there. I mean, I think ultimately even Honda is trying to look out for everybody's best interests.
And I think they proved that
And,
with how
and
quickly they got back and got
yeah,
back. I
yeah,
heard it was
yeah,
like 10 minutes
exactly.
from Kevin Lee, I think said it, but
Yeah. And so, you know, altogether, Graham, I think had it not been Graham that had gotten bumped out of the field, like I think we might have been having a different conversation. But I think that just made the most sense, right? Like he'd been in the
Mhm.
car for the entire week. He's been good at Indy.
that's what I was going to ask you about it. Is that like the biggest aspect? Because I mean, after Honda got back and said we're just going to do this, I was like, well, that couldn't have been any sort of a hangup. Then I would think the hangup of not calling someone who wasn't at the track this year practicing is just that. Like you haven't been in the car this month. Like is that or in the car specifically at
Yeah, yeah.
guys, right? Is that the biggest kind of hurdle to jump over there, or is it kind of like riding a bike once you've driven in way more than many people ever will?
I mean, for me, it doesn't matter that much because I'm used to just having to get in and go. I mean, when they used to be a little bit more lax about how you use the refreshers, like when I was at ECR, I'd be out of the car for the year and go have to be like flat in a couple of laps because they needed me to shake down all three of the team cars in one set of tires during my refresher or whatever. So you kind of that is something I'm mentally prepared for, like showing up and having to do a qualifying lap, but um and would actually look forward to the challenge of having to do that. But part of it is just kind of logistical. Like they have a very established refresher course now that I personally, it's like the bane of my existence at the Speedway that like this is a thing, but they were basically because they've decided that they just make everybody do that. They've kind of have a criteria that doesn't get broken in terms of when they might allow somebody to not do a refresher. Um, and so, when you look at that, look, there's plenty of track time. I talked to the team about it. I talked to Jay Fry about it. They would have made time. They would have like,
Right.
they would have made some concessions to figure that whole thing out. But that's, potentially an hour or two of track time that they need to make available to a team to get my refresher signed off, basically. Which at least, if nothing else, is just not a hassle that anybody has to worry about if they put Graham Rahal in the car. So, um, I think there was a lot of people that were, maybe my friends or fans or whatever, that were trying to say that there was some kind of political, maneuvering with the whole thing. And I think ultimately, like, it's just the thing that kind of, it solved a lot of people's problems to be able to get Graham in the car and for that to be kind of as seamless a transition as possible.
Well, don't let your friends do it. We'll take the hit and tweet that. Just let us know. I do have one big question for you. Do you want the hard version or the easy version?
Whichever
All right. Well,
you
the,
feel like
the
throwing
hard
out.
one you chose is just an extra question. So I
Okay.
was obviously going back and watching the 2011 500 where you finished second to Dan Weldon, but I was watching an interview with you two at Texas. Both you were sitting and about to talk about it before they even asked you about Indy and wrecking on the final lap of the 500. They showed this video of you hurting your knee after crawling under a tunnel and
Yeah.
then running into this, like, it looked like a 2.5 foot tall hurdle, and you just stumbled and nailed your knee, and then it shows you on the ground. You just did not look athletic, and I was like, that's got to hurt way worse than the 500.
Yeah, it was definitely a bummer. I tore my ACL. It was
You tore your ACL in that?
yeah.
Oh man.
The it was, they had this whole I think it was Ryan Briscoe and I were like
Yeah.
meant to race in this obstacle course. Set up by, Michael Johnson, Olympic sprinter and all this kind of stuff. But they, obviously they don't have like a proper turf field anywhere or something. And
Right.
so, um, yeah, it was like I got hung up in like a divot
It was
in
like
the
dry
grass.
Texas grass. You could, I
Yeah,
mean,
it was
it would be,
definitely it was a gnarly kind of situation. But yeah, that was definitely that literally added insult to injury for that to be basically right after yeah, because that year Texas was immediately after the 500. It was the next race because we didn't when then we ran Milwaukee like the following weekend or 2 weeks later or something.
we needed to get back on the ovals. We'll ask you about that in a bit, but going back to that Indy 500, obviously, how long did it personally like kind of take you to get over that? Or was it sort of like 2 weeks later, you're at Texas, we got to get over it or we're not going to run well in this race? And I think you ran well in that Texas race too.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how you define getting over it, I guess. Like you do have to just move on and I think one of the good things about sports in those situations as opposed to having something maybe traumatic happen that isn't so much in the limelight or isn't so black and white kind of not to say I guess that everything that transpired at Indy is totally black and white but at least there's a result attached to it and you're kind of you're forced to confront it and you're forced to have an opinion about it and you're forced to think a lot about it and because you're going to get asked about it a million times like right away.
Yeah, I felt bad even asking it because I'm sure that every interview you've ever done that gets brought up in some way or another.
Yeah, I mean it thankfully doesn't happen in every interview but the I guess to actually answer your question is I kind of I had to deal with it at least just in terms of what it meant in the moment like right away. And then the maybe the longer tail on that is, what kind of attitude do you choose to adopt about that, going forward? You're going to show back up to the, I've raced in 11 more Indy 500s after that. So how does it affect how you show up to, not just to the next race? I mean, the next race is at least at a different place. Okay, yeah, you're sitting there and whatever but I guess a lot of times like within and social media wasn't nearly as crazy back then as it is now. um I was fortunate to have a lot of support from people who I respected and kind of cared what they thought. Like if there was anybody that I really cared what they thought, it's my peers and the people that I'm around and the guys on my team. And those are all people that know that it's more complicated than just you're leading and then you crashed and then you finish second. They know that there's this whole string of events that kind of occurs and that you're in sort of a unique situation that created for that to happen and all of this stuff, right? And so I think that definitely lessened the blow initially, but then, the thing that took me a little while to kind of change my tune on was, it seemed like the obvious way to translate that into showing back up at Indy was getting, also buying into the redemption story. Like, okay, I'm here now to prove whatever, prove people wrong, I guess. Like it wasn't like I was proving people wrong. It was just to like go out there and right the ship somehow,
Mhm.
and I think, and so that's kind of, that was at least in the back of my mind about how I approached showing back up to the 500 for several years after that. And I can't say necessarily that I think that that affected my performance like in a negative way. It just wasn't like a particularly healthy way
Right.
to look at it. I mean, I think, Joseph Newgard and I are boys. And so I actually think a lot of his comments this year after winning it, um, of kind of having to come to grips with the fact that you just might not have like there's a bunch of things that are out of your control that need to come together for you to go win the Indianapolis 500 and that you're going to have a limited number of shots at it, even if you're in really good equipment, and it just might not happen. And it might have nothing to do with you being more than capable of executing if everything goes your way. And so I think I went through a little bit of that like 6 or 7 years ago, that it was just like, this idea of coming back here to win the race is way overly outcome driven, and it's not allowing me to like enjoy and appreciate the fact that I'm just here getting to do this. And by being able to enjoy the actual like day to day, get in the car, go do what I'm here to do, that's actually, by just being focused on that, that's helping me do a better job. That's helping me go out and qualify at my best. And because it's kind of like, you don't get to choose where you're going to stack up at the end of the day. It happens based on what you and your team are able to extract out of the car, and the conditions, and all of that stuff. So um I definitely, I guess to tie a bow on that, like, I sort of got over the chaos of the whole thing right away, but it lingered in some ways that took me a lot longer to start to kind of reframe in the right way for me, for sure.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, like, just with winning an Indy 500, it's like any sports championship that anyone wins, is you're gonna, as long as you're a fan of that team, I know for a fact that you watch a playoff game and you're like, oh, that was a really lucky bounce, and thank goodness that didn't hurt that guy's season or give that guy a ACL that took him out for the year. Did you, like, you need some luck, but did you drive the rest of that season on a torn ACL?
Yeah, which sucked.
Like, I didn't know that was really possible. I've never heard that.
Thankfully, there was a couple of ovals. Like, we had Texas and Milwaukee first. And then, and there was some other, like, Denny Hamlin had torn an ACL mid-season at one point. So I talked to the Gibbs guys to try to figure out like what they had done and what he had done. And basically all the advice I got was like, all the advice I got was basically that the surgery itself is at least as problematic, kind of, in terms of what you'd be dealing with in the car for
Right.
a much longer period of time. So I just dealt with it and, taped it up, and
That's crazy.
like went and drove. Yeah, it was definitely less than ideal, but
I mean,
it is what it is.
He finishes fourth at Iowa on a torn ACL, so that's kind of a big story.
Yeah, so we're both from Iowa. Damon lives in Missouri now. He's a bowling coach, a really good one. National tournament, right, Damon?
Yeah, you could call it that.
We'll count it. You were close enough to get in there. And JR is an Indy 500 champ on this podcast, so we named you guys co-champs, you and Dan.
Right on. I'll take it.
So I was obviously researching for this and everything. I knew you're from California. Did you ever go to Ventura Raceway, check out any of the USAC midget stuff around there in November, or was it kind of just asphalt open wheel since you were a kid?
Pretty much open, well, and all kinds of stuff. I mean, we were, I grew up like 45 minutes from Sears Point, so anything that went there, we went and saw, which was a lot of stuff at the time. I mean, we were, that was John Force, full pass burnouts, AMA superbikes, whatever. NASCAR obviously went there through that whole time period. And then Laguna was an hour and a half away, a couple hours away. So, we saw kart at Laguna and everything else that might have gone there. So not a lot of oval track stuff. I mean, there was bits and pieces of it here and there. I had family down in Hanford, so we saw some dirt track racing, and obviously watched, like I said earlier, I was a huge Dale Senior fan, so watched a lot of oval track stuff, but mainly pavement. But I guess it's all just, to some degree, it's all just racing. So I think,
right, yeah, I should have included.
It's not like it wasn't interesting. It was just kind of maybe not as accessible.
Right, and I knew you drove that pavement USAC race. I didn't know if you had ever sat foot in a USAC car, wanted to drive one of those. I guess that's a better way of asking this. Like, what types of cars have you driven that we maybe don't know about, and what type of car would you want to get in someday that you haven't been
Yeah,
in?
I mean, driven a lot of stuff at least once or twice. Certainly done a bit of sports car racing, prototype stuff, GT stuff, whatever. Haven't spent almost any time in a stock car, which I'd like to reconcile here at some point. The midget, I've done Pikes Peak Hill Climb, I've been out to Bonneville, done rallycross, did some professional drifting. So I've dabbled in a lot of different things. The midget came up basically just because um Andy O'Gara, who's married to Sarah Fisher, and Brad Larson, who was my crew chief at Ed Carpenter Racing for, basically my tenure there. Um, they run Kyle O'Gara, in all it's Silver
Yeah,
Crown sprint cars, I think all pavement stuff basically, but
yeah.
anything that's on pavement, there he runs. And so we just always, BS'd about going and doing something. And so this year, because I wasn't going to be in the big show, Andy was like, "Hey, you should just come out and run the Carbonite Classic, and you'll at least like come get your feet wet and see what it's all about." So I hit him back right away. I was like, "I'm in. Like, I definitely want to check this out and give it a whirl." It was I'd gone to that event. I mean, like 15 years ago or something. And it's still kind of stuck in my mind as being a cool show. So it was really as simple as that. I mean, I definitely, over the last probably 5 years or something, since being full time in IndyCar last, have kind of just, I don't know, a lot of us grew up. I feel like, especially in open wheel, just grew up in an era where, whether it was because things were getting in motorsport generally like more corporate, or on our side, I can definitely say that there was a lot of stress kind of just around, not necessarily for us drivers, but for people who were looking out for us or helping us out, or helping us get to the next level or whatever. A lot of anxiety around not being focused enough on kind of your main thing. And that, because there was a lot of guys that were having trouble even when they were really focused on the main thing, just getting to the promised land basically. And so I think I had sort of adopted a fairly low risk attitude about driving other stuff. Just like, okay, if I'm an IndyCar guy, I'm going to focus on that. I'm not going to get distracted with other things, or whatever, or whatever. I don't know. I don't really know exactly what I had convinced myself of, but and I guess there's a part of it too that once you get to that level, whether it's IndyCar, NASCAR, I give Chase Elliott a lot of props for going and starting his like dirt career as a NASCAR driver, because there is some risk that, whatever, if he goes and sucks at that, what are his fans or dirt fans or whatever are they going to think about him differently? And I think ultimately we all just worry way too much about that, and
Oh, the
that it just
worst, the
does.
worst part of it is like people expect them to have results, and then some people expect them like to put them on a broadcast. And I'm not gonna. The guy's great, but we were watching his wing sprint car debut, and I think he finished 10th. And they mentioned his name one time under a 17-minute red flag. They didn't say Chase
Yeah.
Elliott on the entire rest of the broadcast of the A main at the end of the night. And it's just like
And
he
yeah,
doesn't.
like I
He's a NASCAR champion coming to try your sport. He doesn't need to do well for you to appreciate it. But I
yeah,
think most
exactly.
fans have gotten over that aspect. I don't see fans doing that as often as, I guess, maybe select people. I see more
Yeah.
positive than negative, is what I'm trying to say.
I was gonna say, I mean, I think, it's hard to always keep sort of keep in context that, just because there's a few, people online that are really loud about it doesn't mean that that's, what everybody thinks. And so I think
Mhm.
ultimately for me, I've kind of gotten to a point where it just doesn't matter. Like, I don't care. I don't care what anybody else really thinks about it. Like, I'm a race car driver. I'd like to get more out of my experience of being a race car driver. Yes, I've spent my career up to this point racing open wheel and IndyCar, and obviously that's still my probably primary aim is to, get back, make sure I'm, getting as good a car at the Indy 500 as bare minimum at a bare minimum as I possibly can. But um, there's so much other cool stuff out there, and I think, doing the midget race at IRP was a good example just for me of like, the level of fun and kind of the excitement and the feeling of driving, the kind of reason that you do it in the first place is just not, it's not because the Indy 500 costs, you know, a, 1,000x more and, or whatever, more than that. And is, has 300,000 people there and, all this stuff. The actual experience that you have as a driver is not actually, it's certainly not different on that level of magnitude, right? Like, you can still have a lot of fun and learn something new and kind of gain the benefit of trying new things. And I mean, these are things that are just enjoyable, like regardless of what I think industry you're in, or what position you have. And so I've kind of just said screw it, like I'm just gonna go do more stuff like this, especially like this was an easy one to go do because I get to go do it with guys that I know really well and have
Right,
worked
it's in
with.
town. The car's set up. You're right
Yeah, it
there.
was pretty straightforward. So yeah, I mean, I'll definitely be doing more of that kind of stuff, and I'm looking
Sounds
forward
like
to it.
it sounds like your approach is like night and day difference of when you were a driver a decade ago, of the pressure you put on yourself. Now you're just kind of getting to drive race cars for fun. Like, how much of that to you is important? And, like in a ride like Ryan Hunter-Reay is in right now or something like that, would you take that stress back on you to run another full-time IndyCar season in a team that isn't among the top in the series?
Yeah, I probably would now because I think that I would know that it's just, like enjoying doing that and having it be worthwhile. And this always probably sounds stupid to people. Like, you get to go drive a race car for a living. Like, what could possibly not be enjoyable about that? Um, it's all these things, like whether it's pressure that you put on yourself or the pressure that the teams, or whatever the expectations that teams have. There's a lot of people that are involved in this whole situation.
Mhm.
And it's, it is a lot of travel, and it's a lot, it's disruptive to your life, kind of, just generally, right? So you have to sort of prioritize these things and understand them, and understand them for yourself and your family and whatever. But um I think the other thing for me is just like, the sport itself has become so technical, and and I've been in these situations where you just kind of know, showing up to some particular track, that you're just not in equipment that is set up as well as the guys that are going to run up front that day, and that can become really demoralizing. When you get kind of locked into the competitive, we're all of us guys are super competitive, and women are super competitive. When that starts to spill over and kind of dictate how you think about what's going on, not even necessarily from like a results perspective, but just even as a part of the process, like, are we doing all the things that we can be doing to, it creates this like urgency about everything that
Mhm.
just wears you down. um and so I think my approach now is a little bit more like, there are, not only are there only so many things that I can control, but like, I know that at least I can control what I'm doing. And so I should really, this is like getting back to advice that you get when you're like racing go-karts or something, but like, I should just be focused on doing the best possible job that I can do, and
Right.
not worrying about, you know, you got to be in tune with the engineers, and you can't just like blow off everything else. Like, so it's not to say that, it's just to say, in addition to interacting with the team, in addition to, you also just have to take complete accountability for the fact that like you can also always be a little better, and that's something that can be more of a long-term process. And so you hear a lot, Marcus Ericsson, you hear a lot of these guys talk about, even after getting to the point where they're race winning drivers, a lot of guys not doing it until they get to that point, that they bring on like a mental coach or somebody like that, because they just realize like, you know, yeah, if I just show up and the car is wicked fast everywhere I go, then this is going to be pretty low stress. But there's also all these little things that I can do a little better to make sure that when it's not there, that I qualify 8th instead of 12th, because that's half a tenth. And me just being a little bit more in tune or in the zone or whatever is probably makes up that half a tenth, and that doesn't not matter, you know? So I guess all of that sort of, I say just to say like, I'm definitely in a mode now where as a professional race car driver, I'm just looking for places that I can kind of get more out of my experience, and that is not in my mind dictated by the winner's check or any of that really. At this point, it's kind of like, what else is out there that I have an incredible opportunity to maybe go do lots of different stuff than what I've done thus far in my career. And so I'd like to not burn that.
You ever heard of the Nationals?
I have.
Your face makes it seem like you don't want to come down and race it. We're just going to invite you to party with us.
Okay. Yeah, I'm into that.
All right. I'll have my people.
You learn a lot from watching sometimes. So
I like that. I do want to ask this because we mentioned we were going to come back to it. So I do want to ask, we hear rumblings of Milwaukee possibly coming back on the IndyCar circuit and some of these racetracks, obviously wanting to get back to an oval, get some more ovals back on the track or on the schedule. Where is some of those places that you'd like to see the series get back to and or add for the first time?
Can I real quick add on to this question and ask, why do you think it's taking longer, it seems, or it seems like we're not hearing the rumblings we would usually hear at this time of year if that was coming in the next season? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah.
You're obviously a guy
I
that's been around the sport and you kind of just hear word of mouth stuff, but it's weird to me that the promise has been there and it's like, just wait for the next season and the next season. And we're kind of just in a big cycle of like, let's see if we have more than 6 next year.
I mean, I guess the unfortunate truth is that the oval races outside of Indianapolis just aren't making a ton of business sense for the series, basically. And so, and that's not to say, I mean, Iowa was a great show last year. Obviously, Hy-Vee invested a lot in that experience.
The big asterisk on the Hy-Vee part too is how much they bring into the track and how much they pay to put all that stuff there. Like that, you don't have a big title sponsor supporting other ovals like that.
Well, right. And so I guess, some of those things are a little bit of like, are we putting the cart before the horse just to say that, oh, well, we just, you need these certain factors to exist. And it's kind of like, well, is this like a, an outlier, or is this a case study in terms of like what this relationship between Hy-Vee and Iowa and Penske and the track and all of this stuff? Like, is this something that can be replicated in other places and we just need to find a good partner to do that, or is this super unique in terms of what Hy-Vee saw and did, and it'll be interesting to see what that looks like this year now that ticket sales are apparently much more expensive and all this kind of stuff. So I guess it's just kind of like, the series has tried in a lot of other places, at least here and there. And it's just sort of not worked. They're struggling like hell at Texas. So that sort of makes you think twice about other tracks and places that are kind of like that. If you just said, and I don't necessarily think that this is true, but if you just said, all right, we're taking 1.5 miles off the we're not going to more mile and a halves because for whatever reason we just don't think that they're going to draw. Um, there's not that much that's left over basically
Right.
after that, and so I like we you occasionally hear some discussion about like Homestead. You occasionally hear just because it's in a market that's different, right? Like it's not another Midwestern, track. Milwaukee certainly comes up. Um, I mean, I guess I think long term, I say we like as the series and IndyCar and its fans and whatever, um, need to kind of just think about like where are the places that showcase the product of IndyCar best, and what do we care about from that perspective? And so if we think that some of these oval tracks really showcase what IndyCar is and how it's different than other stuff, well, like then what's the missing link and how do we solve that? If we think
Right.
that this is somewhere that, showcases what IndyCar has to offer in like an extraordinary way, but people still aren't showing up and we're not getting the TV. I mean, that was kind of always my thing with like the tail end of the more IRL-ish era of the whole thing was, people were losing their minds that they were starting to axe oval races. And it's kind of like, well, look, like we've had all these crazy close finishes and all this stuff, but
I think
nobody shows up,
the Texas race that they just ran there this year is probably going to be one of the top 3 races of the year across every series that we cover, and probably the rest of them too.
and but it's kind of like if that doesn't ultimately move the needle, if that
Right.
happening doesn't move the needle in terms of people showing up and television viewership and all this stuff, then it just kind of doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So, I don't profess to have an answer to the question for sure, but I think that it's definitely, and I guess I would say rest assured Roger wants there to be more ovals on the schedule, and they're trying to figure out how to kind of crack that nut in terms of making it make sense.
Do you think that they're looking away from mile and a halfs because of the Texas reason?
I have no idea, to be
We,
totally honest
we
with you.
brought you
I
on here
mean,
thinking you had all the answers.
no, that's above my pay grade. I think that, I guess I would think in some respects, no, because a lot of the other mile and a halfs are different than Texas is, right? So
Right.
as long as you can go to somewhere that doesn't, I mean, I guess I was going to say, as long as you can go to somewhere that doesn't have PJ1 all over it, but I feel like a lot of them do now.
I think
Um,
it's Kansas might be the only one that doesn't.
yeah. Kansas has a special place in my heart because that's where my first Indy Lights win came. But yeah, it's just tricky. I mean, it's kind of, it depends upon, the series really digging its heels into what it feels like its kind of brand and product is meant to be. And, what are the tracks that showcase that best, and how do you kind of make business sense out of that? Because it's kind of like, there is an element of it that if you were to take a little bit of a different viewpoint, like, okay, compare IndyCar to F1. All right, well, yeah, it's more raw, it's better racing, it's all of those things on any kind of road and street circuit. It goes to much grittier, kind of gnarlier places than F1 ever would, so it's got that going for it. But is it something when you watch it that is fundamentally just like completely knocking your socks off watching a race car
Right.
go around the track? Like, I would honestly say no. Like, so do the cars need another 400 horsepower to like really be awesome and really feel like they're in that tier of racing? Like, probably.
Mhm.
Um, how
And
does
he's
that
starting to sound
change
like
what
us
we're doing
NASCAR
for?
fans.
Yeah, yeah, well, yeah. Don't get me started. Anyway, so there's, I guess it's just to say there's like a lot that goes into kind of making the whole thing make sense. And I think, realistically for IndyCar right now, it's not like outside of the speedway or outside of the Indianapolis 500 having nothing to do with the fact specifically that it's an oval. It's got these questions to answer about a lot of the places that it goes. So, I guess it's not exclusive to oval racing that these things need to get figured out.
Sure.
Absolutely. And then you mentioned Marcus Ericsson. I was wondering what you thought of his post race comments and kind of how the last 4 laps, including when to throw that red flag and how many warm up laps to give these guys. I was wondering what you kind of thought of that whole late race situation. And did Joseph winning and you guys being friends, did that have anything to do with what you were cheering for?
Well, I mean, I think I wasn't really. Well, I'd say this. I think that the race ending, if you're just gonna compare, and obviously we can do this with the benefit of hindsight, but you know, I regardless of how it kind of got prepped, a full lap under green with a green flag pass that wasn't immediately after the restart, like took a half a lap down the back straight, had to defend down the front straight is, I think, regardless of who it is unquestionably a better finish than go green, the leader gets passed, immediately go yellow as
Yeah.
they go across the start finish line, end the
Mhm.
race. Like I don't love that as the way that the race ends. Again, just regardless of who's in front and how the whole thing works.
For sure.
I think the red flag. I guess my take on the red flag is it's definitely abnormal for them to do it that way, but they've made it pretty clear that they're going to go to whatever lengths they can to finish under green, and that to some degree just like driving around under yellow and finishing the race under yellow with 2 cars wrecked on either side of the front straightaway. And so like the fact that they threw a red just on, like, regardless of, I was honestly thinking like maybe they're throwing a red and they're just going to drive the cars once they get the track clear, they're just going to drive everybody back around under yellow and it's still going to
Oh,
finish under yellow. But
Hmm.
I mean, so I guess I would say just throwing the red in the first place was not a bad idea for various reasons, having nothing to do with whether they were going to go back green or not. Even for the sake of kind of abiding by the precedent that they've set in the past or have seemed to set, they should have gone red a lap sooner. Um, so I think in my mind, if I was Marcus, yes, I would be. I totally feel for the guy because you, based on what has happened in the past, you're in the lead with 3 4 to go or whatever when that happened and the yellow came out and it was made it, I think it made it 4 to go, and then they drove
yeah.
around for a lap
Yeah,
and then
they
changed
they
it.
waited a
Hmm.
lap to throw. We
Um,
got in a big debate on our last
you're
episode.
thinking you're probably allowing yourself to think this is it and we
Hmm.
just won the Indy 500. So and that you've been allowed to think that, you're allowing yourself to think that because of the way that this has worked in the past.
And
Um,
being the defending winner, and that
yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
extra like I'm a back to back winner now, and then you have to
So
reset after all
but
that.
even yeah, I mean, even just the fact that so I get that totally. I completely understand his perspective on the whole thing. I guess ultimately it's like it's within the rules to do what they did. Um, they Marcus did get a great jump on the. I mean, odds were another yellow was going to come out before they got to the end of the back straightaway, and
Mhm.
Marcus would have won anyway. So he did an awesome. I mean, I'll just give him props for. I mean, I was on Twitter. Hinch kind of said it on the broadcast. I was like, "Yo, do whatever the hell you want. Like,
Hmm.
leave, go slow, go fast, leave in at the exit of turn 3. Like, as long as you don't pull a Scott Goodyear and pass the pace car, like."
Yeah.
You're totally, because what are they going to do?
Is
Like,
that is
if you
that what it looked like when it looked all jumbled kind of, and it was like, why isn't Santino getting up there? Was he? Do guys typically in that spot like are adjusting, going fast, going slow, and screwing with everyone behind them?
No, I think I guess my point was just like, Pato had a restart waved off because he was going too slow and
Hmm.
but
Right.
got an
Yeah.
awesome jump because he was going so slow and he just was creeping through 3 and 4 and then took off and was able to create a lot of separation just because of the fact that he was going so slow to start with. Um, I guess my point was basically just whatever you think is the strategy that's going to get you to turn 1 first as the leader, whether that's creeping like Pato
Mhm.
was or leaving early
Hmm.
or whatever. you got to, what are they gonna do?
And they're going to
Right.
throw a yellow
They
and
either
they'll
they either
refuse to
they
run
either
to a
wave it
wire.
off, they either wave it off and you win, or they just let it
They
go
let it go.
and you have whatever advantage you've gained. I mean, I do think that the one thing that sucks about there being these red flags, or not even red flags, but just yellows at the end of the race to restarts, is you are just a sitting duck as the leader. And so I'm totally of the opinion that whether it's the actual start of the race or restarts throughout the race, like, let's just let the leader, as long as the leader is maintaining pace, like not brake checking people, they gotta just let them do whatever the hell they want to
Sure.
try to not lose that advantage. But um yeah, I think it was all just so quick. You're straight out of the pits. I don't put a lot into,
Well, you said it yourself. You're a
you
guy that
know,
can show up and run a qualifying lap. How
not
long do
scrub.
you take to run the tires, warm the tires up?
Yeah, like I don't put a lot into not scrubbing tires or whatever. Like you're not building heat meaningfully. The oval tire it switches on instantly. Like it's not if the difference between how that would feel on a road course versus an oval is night and day. In terms of the benefit that you have by having a
Right.
lap
Yeah.
to clean everything up. Um, I think it was basically just, yeah, like, how ready are you for this when you have literally half a lap to prep? I mean, you're going to come onto the track in turn one and you got to figure out what you're doing by turn three.
Mm-hmm.
We talked to Joseph afterward and he was kind of like, yeah. And I kind of called him out on it. Like, it seemed like you got a terrible jump. Like, was that on purpose or not? Or I mean, obviously ended up working out perfect to get the run on the back straight, but it seemed to me that there was a lot of risk that you just never make it to the back straight before another yellow comes out.
Right.
And he was kind of like, well, I didn't want to be, he was basically like, I didn't want to be right on Marcus because he felt like then that gives whoever's in third actually the best run down the front straightaway because they get to draft off of both of you basically. So he was kind of like, I wanted to leave some gap for that reason, and it just ended up turning out that Santino was kind of sleeping. I guess like I haven't talked to him
Yeah.
about it, but it just looked that way. Like he had Rossi and Pillow all over him going through turn four, and Joseph and Marcus had kind of both already taken off. So yeah, I mean, definitely, it's not like a picture perfect restart, but
Right.
I'm
So
also not mad about them
Real
doing it.
quick on Santino, because his career fascinates me as much as yours. Like when I see JR Hildebrand's name, I'm like, well, I know for one thing he's not going to finish last. He's going to contend middle of the pack. He won't look embarrassing in the back of the field. I've never seen you in a car. Even that USAC race, I was watching for you the whole time. I was like, there's a chance he could look bad here, and I'm like, nope, looked fine. And then when it's Santino, I'm just ever since he kind of first got on the scene in that big, I think Jeff Gluck wrote it, that big article about him being America's next motorsports phenom or whatever. It's just like, what is going to happen with this guy's career next? And there was a ton of rumblings and stuff over the years, and it's like the kid's never really gotten in trouble. He's never really done anything horrific on a racetrack.
Not an IndyCar, at least. He's got in a lot of trouble overseas, which I think has kind of lingered with him, whether that's fair or not. I've always gotten along with him fine. He's definitely just a guy that he for whatever reason like rubs some people the wrong way still, but I guess I kind of look at him as a guy that like doesn't overthink it, and if you plug him in the thing and it's fast, like he'll go drive it, and he manages to keep his own nose clean for the most part. And sometimes especially on ovals, it's kind of as simple as that, like just being able to find the groove and know when. I think he has a pretty good like natural kind of tolerance for like how hard the car can be driven, like how close to the limit it can be driven lap after lap, without exceeding that, dramatically, which is a hard thing to do, so yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that in a good car, I mean, obviously Foyt made a ton of improvements over this offseason. I was for sure I was bummed not to have been able to put a program together with him to at least run the 500. But that's Santino and good equipment is definitely a recipe for running up at the front at races like that for sure.
Damon, what were you going after before that? Sorry.
So I just wanted to ask, if Marcus does set a slow pace there or does jump the start there, do you think that they want to make the officiating call there in that position? And do you think they make that call?
I don't. That's why I think they they want to see the race end under green. So I don't think they care really as long as it's not something that's super egregious.
Right.
Like I said, I mean, I think if he had brake checked Newgarden or something, then that becomes problematic somehow. But yeah, I mean, I think that and he took advantage of that. I mean, that was a way better restart he was the only guy in the entire race that didn't get passed going down the front straightaway as the leader. So, I mean, I think that just goes to show that he did sort of take advantage of it. But, that's well within his right, I think, at the end of the race.
Awesome. The last thing I wanted to ask you, you told us last night that you were taking care of the kiddos. We just had Dominic Selzy on. He's another Californian. He said he won't let his kid near a race car. He doesn't want them to race. Do you want your kids in race cars?
I don't know. I mean, well, I think it feels hypocritical to say no. I've obviously done this and been able to make a living doing it. And, a lot of the relationships that I have and the way that I am as a guy, as an adult, as a person, have been kind of formed through, the good and the bad of doing this thing. So I certainly won't force it on them, but, I think if it's something that they want to pursue, that's up to them.
Going to be hard to say no.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely be hard to say no.
I would just love in 20 years to see a JR Hildebrand Jr. in the Indy 500 and see how they would put that on the graphics card.
I hear you.
Well, thanks for taking the time. We really, really appreciate it, and appreciate you and being a big part of my IndyCar career as a fan. So thank you for that too.
Right on. Happy to have done it. And thank you guys for having me on.
Absolutely, man.